more you look, you see the hand of the immune system deep in there. And the more you look into that, you find the hand of the brain deep in there, trying to have a two-way kind of dialogue with the immune system and trying to like work things out. After 15 years of digging, I was like, actually, it's the neuroimmune system. That is the thing that ties everything together.
Dan Nicolau is a scientist and leading researcher with 6 degrees, developing biological computers and new models of the brain and immune system
to better predict, prevent, and treat disease.
You asked me what comes first, the brain or the immune system? I answered the immune system.
Almost everybody says the immune system's older, whereas objectively, the brain is far older. You need both. They need to work together. If you didn't need both, we wouldn't have both.
Do you think that the negative thought is influencing our inflammation and causing more chronic disease than ever before?
Absolutely. Depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar are inflammatory conditions. Social media use at some levels causes inflammation. If you get rid of it, your inflammation will get better. And if you bring it back, your inflammation will get worse again.
Can you talk about the study or the thoughts and hypothesis that you're looking at now with inflammation and social media?
We know that those people who do content moderation for a job have terrible health outcomes. Many of them commit suicide. It made me start thinking that attention should be protected like a human right.
You said something to me that once we have this big baseline crash, whether it's a virus or burnout, we never return back to the baseline.
There is compelling evidence that your immune system is sort of shocked into a state from which it will always be on alert after that. If every day you're like, what can I do today to bring down my inflammation level a tiny bit? After 2 years, you're a completely different person. You've increased your lifespan by 10 or 20 years.
Firstly, I want to say thank you to tuning in and listening to the show. It means a huge amount. And connecting with all of you is something that I absolutely love as part of this journey of growing the show. One of my biggest goals of 2025 is doubling the reach of this show. And I can't do that without your support. So I would love to ask you a favor. If you can press subscribe or follow on whichever platform you listen to. This helps us reach more people. And for me, elevating women in science is so fundamental and ethical and scientific information. So if you feel the show empowers you and gives you the information that you've been seeking, I would love to ask a favor in return and to hit that subscribe button and help me reach the goal that I've set for the show of 2025. Thank you. Dan, welcome to Live Well, Be Well.
Thank you.
I am very excited to have you on today. Somebody who has spanned many degrees, mathematician, engineering, doctor. I mean, I'm going to let you actually describe yourself and the beauty of everything that you've done because you have such a curiosity of a personality. But I want to start before we even get to who you are, what's your mission. When we first spoke last week and we were talking about how we're going to direct this conversation, you turned your screen to a very old book that was on a nightstand that was written for Louis XIII, I want to say?
Yes.
And it's the only standing medical book of that time written just for him. And you were saying like what really stands out about that book is before even the microscope came out, they had this understanding between the connection of the mind and the body, which is something that I am very passionate about. And although they didn't know from the mechanics of how this all worked, they knew that when the mind was in a negative state, it influenced the body into a negative state and vice versa. Can you tell me about something that's really stood out from looking at that book to where we are today with our medicine and prevention and how we're seeing the body as one unit or not one unit?
Basically, in the first chapter, he is explaining to the king what is medicine. And basically, he says something like, look, to summarize the first chapter, Your Majesty, people get sick sometimes. They get injured or they get sick in other ways. And we have herbs and other tinctures and ointments available. And we try them on people. Sometimes they make them die faster and sometimes they make them better. And then we hold on to the ones that make them better, the behaviors and the herbs and the tinctures and the ointments that make us better. And then we sort of throw away the other ones. And that, Your Majesty, is the practice of medicine. So that sentence was written in like 1680. And it's absolutely how we do medicine today. Basically, that's what clinical trials are. So, yeah, it seems like we've learned a lot and at the same time, almost nothing.
Well, you asked me a really interesting question, which you said, what comes first, the brain or the immune system? And I was thinking, well, one, I'm going to put that to the audience listening, like what would come first, the brain or the immune system? And people might go, well, didn't they first come together? And then I answered the immune system. And you said, that's what most people answer.
Everyone.
right? But it's the brain. So how did the brain evolve first, and how did the immune system then later come in? Because I think most people would think that they came together, but they didn't. And why is that an important function to understand?
Yeah, thanks for the question. They did come together, but one could ask which one is older. You could ask that about features of society, such as government and the army, for example. So the immune system, when we say immune system, most of the time, what we mean is the adaptive immune system. We're thinking of B cells, antibodies, T cells. There is an older arm, the innate immune system, which is very ancient. And in fact, bacteria have some. But usually when we say immune system, we mean fighting infections using antibodies, B cells, T cells. That appeared with jaws, jawed fish. Why jaws, no one knows. But a hint is that 75% of our immune system is in our gut, even today. So something to do with nutrition, importantly for your podcast, or not irrelevantly. The brain is far older than jaws. The brain is, in fact, it's older than vertebrates, right? So the brain appeared hundreds of millions of years earlier. Animals are about 700 million years old. And the adaptive system is something like 450 or 500. So the brain is actually much older, much, much older. And it's had a lot longer to think about how to control and keep in balance the body that it's attached to. And the immune system's also had several hundred million years to think about how to tell the brain what it should or should not do. But it's interesting that almost everybody says the immune system's older, whereas objectively the brain is far older.
And why is it really important? Because I'm very interested in understanding the mind and the body as kind of one unit. And you talk a lot about the immune system and the brain working together in balance. Why is that so integral for people to understand?
Well, one way to look at it, I don't know if I have a good answer to that, but one way to look at it is, why do we need both? You could imagine an alien species that just doesn't have a brain and an immune system. It just has one thing, right? So maybe one reason is because they can do very different things. So the brain can look ahead. You have eyes, you have ears, you can smell, you can plan, you can reason, you can integrate what's happening around you. And for example, avoid, say hugging someone who has an infection, just to give a very simple example. But the brain is limited to, it can control the nervous system and it can control behavior and actions, but it's limited. It can't get down into really the trenches. The immune system cannot look ahead. It can only respond. So if you have an infection or if you have a cancer or, looking at your social media too much, it can respond to that, but it can't plan. But in return for its inability to plan, because it can only respond to what it doesn't have eyes and ears, basically, it has extraordinary superpowers. And if it wanted to melt you like the Nazis in the first installment of Indiana Jones, it could. And sometimes there are autoimmune reactions that are extremely severe and fatal. So it's extraordinarily powerful, but sort of blind. It can only respond. So we need both for this reason, because you need to be able to respond at the really local tissue level, like get down to like the smallest cell, the smallest little bit of bone, and at the same time to plan so you don't put yourself in situations in which you need to mount a really serious immune response. So that's why it's important to understand this connection, because you need both. They need to work together. If you didn't need both, we wouldn't have both. Evolution would have done away with one or both of them a long time ago. That's why it's important to understand that they need to work together. It's indispensable to health and life for them to work together.
Because it's interesting, because I know you agree with this, so much of medicine is treated in silos. So you have the very few immunologists. I've got one sat here today. You've got your neuroscientists, you've got your cardiovascular doctors. Everyone's kind of working in silos, and they work very, very, very far down into the depth of their area. But very rarely do they cross. Now, you work in neuroimmunology, which basically does cross these two sectors. One, how did you kind of dial into this sector? And how can we make sure that both of these systems are working in balance as somebody listening to take this into tangible advice? How can we understand if one is misfiring and which one it is?
The reason things have become siloed is just because of specialization, basically. It's not just in health and medicine. It's something that happens in business and in every aspect of human endeavor, but it's gone too far. And the ancients, even in this book, understood that things are connected. Usually Galen is blamed for this increasing subspecialization and partitioning, but actually it's unfair. He very much held the view that everything is connected. So he's sort of blamed unfairly. But in any case, just the way grants are given for research and the way medical funding is allocated. There's a department of cardiology, there's a department of, neurology, there's a department of gastroenterology, right? And so there just isn't very much crosstalk between them. The cardiologist refers to gastro.
You think about somebody going in for gastro reasons, it could be that the fact that, the brain-gut connection is so integral, and yet we're just looking at the gut microbiome on its own. And so that's why I found your work really fascinating, because you're kind of pulling it all together and looking at it as a computer system. That's how you describe it.
Yeah, as a computer system, and one in which the communication is two-way, right? Because I think when you say neuroimmunology, the neuro goes first. I mean, you could have named it the other way, hypothetically, right? And we haven't done that. But there are some examples from everyday life that offer, I think, a hint that what we sort of see as neuroimmune interactions, which are sometimes considered like interesting curiosities or whatever, are actually that we've misunderstood everything, basically, that we're just wrong about it all, and that we are seeing a very tiny tip of an extraordinarily large iceberg under the water. For example, if you had to guess what proportion of people have peanut allergy in the population, just take a guess. I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
I should know this because I had Professor Gideon Lack on, so I should know this.
He's at King's.
Yeah, I know. Do I want to say 20%? Am I too high?
You're a little too high. So, self-reported peanut allergy severe enough that, your GP knows about, it is about 1.5%, something like that in Western Europe.
Okay, I really missed that.
A lot of people think they're a little bit sensitive, but in terms of actual serious peanut allergy, it's about 1.5%. Let's call it 2%, 3%, something like that. Yeah. But when you actually test people and you give them a little peanut challenge to see if they mount an immune response, then what would you guess is the incidence of?
Oh, I know that's like a 75% decrease if you start giving them bits of peanuts.
It's a factor of 25 times decrease. It's 0.1%. 90. So that means that 95, I want to choose my words carefully, but something like 95% or more of peanut allergy is in your head, not in the sense that you're crazy, not in the sense that you're a hypochondriac, but in the sense that objectively, the degree of immune, the number of people who mount an immune response, a frank immune response, is far, far, far lower than the number of people who say they have peanut allergy. And they really do in some sense, because if you show them videos of people eating peanuts or they smell peanuts, they do actually get a reaction. So they are really they are peanut allergic, but not to peanuts.
Wow.
The brain has kept a record, essentially, of this is the work that we're concentrating on at the moment in the lab. But
it holds and stores these memories.
Yeah, and it will respond even if it's not really peanuts. Like you get on an airplane, you smell peanuts. The smell of peanuts can't trigger an immune response because the molecules are too small. So, but people do get. Actually, I was on a plane last week and somebody had an immune reaction to peanuts from smelling them, from someone next to them eating them. It's not possible. That's not a way that a reaction can really happen classically, and yet the person did have a response. So it must be the case that a vast majority, and not just in peanuts, I'm just giving an example, but everything from cancer to pain to, name your disease, that a great proportion of it must be neuroimmune, as in something to do with a misunderstanding between the brain and the immune system about what's really going on.
I've spent years in the fashion industry, but also years as a scientist, trying to understand how our bodies are meant to move. And I'll be honest with you, most shoes are terrible for our feet. I know this firsthand. For years, I wore the wrong shoes, ones that looked great, but in reality gave me persistent back pain and messed up toenails. I searched everywhere for a pair of shoes that wouldn't just support my feet, but would also help them heal. And I struggled because most healthy shoes don't exactly scream style. And then I found Vibo Barefoot, something that finally looks good and actually works. I wear mine with cargo pants, awesome leather trousers, a crisp white tee, and my favorite sunnies. Not only do they feel great, but they really fit my style. Wide, thin, and flexible, these shoes allow my feet to move naturally the way they're supposed to. And the best part, just 6 months of barefoot shoes can increase your foot strength by 60%, helping to undo the years of damage from conventional footwear. Now, if you've ever had the same problem and tried to find a shoe that supports your body without sacrificing style, then this is it. Try Vivo Barefoot for yourself and feel the difference. You can get 20% off if you use the code LWBW20 at vivobarefoot.com, where the T's and C's apply. Trust me, your feet, your back, and your outfit will thank you.
Wow. So how, if we're looking at the fact that the brain is holding these memories and then directing it to the immune system to cause an inflammatory response, I'm guessing, how can we start looking at this to help decrease chronic diseases? Because, you know, we're not dying from infectious diseases anymore. We're dying from, you know, chronic diseases like Alzheimer's. Dementia is the number one killer here in the UK. In America, it's cardiovascular disease. It's the number one killer. How can we, I mean, cancer is where a lot of your work is done as well. 1 in 2 people will be diagnosed with cancer. If our brain is holding these memories, and this is just to allergies, but as you said, to any disease, how can we help our brain stop this misfiring into the immune system?
That's a great question, which I think my lab will spend the next 10 years working on.
If you could just tell us that now, that would be great.
I can give you a hint. So if we unpack it a little bit speculatively, if the brain has a sort of database space that it's allocated to like records of immune challenges, let's give them a name. Let's call them pathograms. I think that's the first time I've actually said that word out loud. And it's not a word that exists, but let's just coin it on your podcast. So let's just say you have this space like a hard drive, and you are keeping a record. You had peanuts once, and it didn't work out so well. So now you have a record, right? Or you had some berries in the savannah or something, and it gave you diarrhea, for instance. And so you've kept a record, so that if it happens again, you don't have to wait for the immune system to kind of organize its B cells and T cells. You can respond more quickly. That would be the obvious reason why you have this feature, right? But let's now also postulate that in the savannah many, many hundreds of thousands of years ago, you were required to keep a record of a very small number of such things. Bad berries, a small number of infections, like a very small number of bugs that were around that could make you sick, and a few other things. But now, cut frame to 2025, the same space in the brain, and maybe it's in a little bit in the center called the insular cortex, or maybe it's somewhere else, but let's say you have this space there. Now it's required to keep a track not only of the stuff that was relevant in the savannah, but also work stress, social media, who you should vote for or not vote for, eating strawberries in winter, eating fruits from very far away lands that your immune system has never seen, eating all sorts of processed things, touching plastic, drinking liquids that are quite synthetic, drinking things that are not synthetic, but they're just from, very far away or out of season, and pollution and social media and, all the tax paperwork you've got to do and stuff. Those are all going to be immune challenges on some level, maybe small ones, maybe big ones, but they're all going to be immune challenges because they're going to stress you out a little bit and the body. So now you're keeping a record in the same space. You're now having to cram like 10,000 potential memories where previously you needed to keep like 100 in there. So they're going to step on each other.
Yeah, I think we have something like 80,000 thoughts a day.
Is that right? I'm sure that number's smaller for me. Maybe it's 80,000.
No, I think, you will. Like, it's like the things that we're
right.
processing. And I think something around it, please don't, no one quote me on this because I could be wrong, but it's around something like 80% of those are negative.
Is that right?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Huh. Yeah, that sounds right. That scans. Yeah, so I think that's the end. That I don't have. I mean, like I said, the lab is working on this actively, but maybe you have this kind of pathogram space, and you're sort of just retrieving the wrong things from the wrong drawers. It's like you're keeping too many things in a small number of drawers, right? So you're mounting a correct immune response, but to the incorrect question. Like you're Googling the wrong thing, essentially. Right. So Google's giving you the right answer, but it's the right answer to the wrong query. And for example, that might explain why autoimmune diseases are going up so rapidly. because all those stimulations you're going to pull some sort of neuroimmune memory out of there, but you're probably pulling the wrong one. For example, you're trying to access the response to Epstein-Barr virus, and in the process you cause multiple sclerosis, for example.
Which is on the rise, which you told
Which is
me
rapidly
as well.
on the rise, yeah.
And you mentioned something really interesting to me as well, which I think will connect to this, that most of us just think of the immune system as fighting infections, right? So that's one of the biggest things that most of us will think, oh, I'm getting sick all the time, so I need to think about like supporting my immune system. But you're saying actually we shouldn't be thinking about our immune system just as fighting infections. Why? I
think it's completely clear that that's not what it's for. I think it's completely clear to anybody with eyes to see and ears to hear, right? So why would you get inflammation from social stress, right? Like people who are, for example, scared of losing a spouse to cancer have inflammation levels that exceed like diabetes or cancer. If you lose a night of sleep, a study came out recently out of Kuwait of all places. If you lose a night of sleep, you have the same inflammation level as if you had diabetes. Why would that happen if the immune system was for fighting infections? That's just doesn't make sense. I think the reason we think of it that way is because the way we've discovered its actions is through its large actions, right? So imagine if you're looking from space or something, if you're an alien on Mars, you're looking at what's happening on Earth, and maybe you can only see like big movements of like people. So you might conclude that the government is for fighting war. And you might support that by saying, okay, well, countries that don't have a functional government get invaded and taken over. And that is true. But that doesn't mean that the government's for fighting war, although that is one of the many things it does. Nobody would say that the government's for fighting war. But if you only see the big actions because you don't have a good enough telescope, then maybe that's what you conclude. So the hypothesis that we are working on is that that's exactly what's happening with the immune system, because we've only had the experimental tools to see it mount immune responses to pathogens, to diseases. We think that it's what it's for. Whereas in fact, that may be just 1% or 2%, an important 2% of what it does. And the rest of the time, it's more like a big bureaucracy whose job it is to keep you, like, what the bureaucracy does, like fix potholes, make sure kids can go to school, and yes, occasionally imprison criminals, but not mostly. Mostly it's like potholes in schools, It's
so interesting because I think that there is so much that we don't know about the immune system. And as you said it so eloquently, we're like at the tip of the iceberg and there's so much underneath. If I think back to 10 years ago when I first started studying nutritional science, the gut microbiome was starting to come on the rise. Yeah. People were really talking about the gut microbiome, and we were saying, how a large majority of our immune system is starting in the gut. You also talk about how it's also in the lungs, which I think some people might be quite shocked to hear about. Just from hearing you, I feel that this is going to be the next sector that is exploding. And if I'm thinking about, coronavirus, that was a huge explosion. And I know that you did a lot of work within that kind of came out where all of a sudden we were discovering so many questions, maybe new questions and some new answers that were coming out of that data. This feels like it's the new area of research that's going to start to make a lot more sense to kind of prevention of diseases.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got a sympathetic audience in me because we're a neuroimmunology lab. I know everyone says that, wants to say that AI is the frontier of the 21st century, but I respectfully disagree. And I'm a computer scientist, so I know a little bit about AI. I think neuroimmunology we're going to look back in 50 years from now and think about how little we knew about the mind-body connection and neuroimmunology the same way we now look back on when people didn't have antibiotics or basic sanitation. We're just going to think that people were savages, basically. Yeah. When you look at these observations, like the thing about, more than 10x peanut allergies must be a neuroimmune interaction. When you look at the fact that people undergoing immunotherapy do a lot better if they have a positive mindset. When you think about the outcomes in cancer, the outcomes in cardiovascular disease, I just think we will look back and feel pity. In 2075, we'll look back and feel pity on people living in 2025, most of whom will still be alive, that we just didn't understand this profound connection between the mind and body, and that it actually runs the show. Yeah. But in a quiet, understated way.
And then that's been something that for me has been so profound, because for me, mental health was massive within the first part of my life within the fashion industry, where I had a lot of stress and had extreme burnout. And that's when I first turned to physical health, which led me to mental health, to realize that actually these two can only coexist together. You can't look at them separately. And so I've spent the last 10 years and a lot through the show of really trying to discover, how can we work with all of these together? And that's where the power of the outcome of prevention and our health kind of is at the forefront of all of it. And when we shouldn't be looking at these separately. Thinking about that and thinking about, how sadly our mental health is decreasing, and a lot of people say we're in a mental health epidemic. Our stress is increasing. You spoke about all the external factors of stress, and I think everyone listening to this podcast will at some degree within their day have experienced a large amount of stress. Do you think that the negative thoughts, I said around 70% of our thoughts are negative, is influencing our inflammation and causing more chronic disease than ever before?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. So every mental health state, as in disorder that we can think of, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, bipolar, are inflammatory conditions.
Can I ask if neurodiversity sits in that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. So in some cases, if you have someone with ASD who is, struggling to function, or someone with ADHD who's struggling to function. I mean, certainly in ASD, there's a big inflammatory component. There's no question about that. So yes, I would include those. There's a spectrum, obviously. Yeah. ASD, the S stands for spectrum, and we are all on the spectrum by definition of a spectrum. But yes, all of those are inflammatory conditions, and that actually suggests two very almost childlike hypotheses. The first one is that by reducing inflammation, we can just improve those things potentially radically. And two, that the reason some medications, for example, antidepressants work is actually because they're anti-inflammatories, and that they potentially have nothing at all to do with the brain in that sense, but they may just be reducing inflammation in there. And that's maybe why they work. And if that's the case, then the game at a high level is about reducing inflammation generally, not just through medication, but broadly. If really the whole story there really is medication, if the giant iceberg basically under the water is inflammation, then that's kind of our work. That's our job, to try to bring down chronic inflammation. I mean, acute inflammation, you need to fight infections, but chronic inflammation caused by, of course, negative thoughts. It's been known for a long time. These are not new discoveries. They just have been ignored. People have known for a long time, in the 60s and 70s, that negative thoughts and negative emotional states are inflammatory states.
I think it sounds so simple, but I think so many times when you're treated in hospital, that's just not even a component of a conversation. I think even seeing a psychiatrist or somebody in mental health, none of this is kind of spoken about together. I don't know if you know this, but is there a correlation of people that have worse mental health symptoms have worse physical outcomes?
Of course.
There is.
Of course.
Wow.
There's an enormous body of evidence on that. There are hundreds of papers on that. That has been known for a long time. It's been ignored. It's been ignored by the medical community because of siloing. Not because people are bad or stupid, but just because we are siloed. But it's been known, and the evidence is rapidly accumulating for what it's worth, in case we need a bit more. It is very well known that people with a lot of negative emotional states do worse at cancer, do worse at diabetes, do worse at cardiovascular disease, and in turn that those things, of course, make you feel worse, make you feel more anxious and more depressed. So yes, we have actually known for a long time. It isn't really new work. Now we have better tools, so we can understand the mechanisms and maybe hopefully modify them. But it's not new information that your mindset has a massive impact on your physical health outcomes, if I can even use that phrase, because if we're thinking about it holistically, what does that really mean?
Yes.
Like when you say mind-body connection, but the mind is part of the body.
Yeah, what it is, I think, I refer this, and I'm sorry if anyone's heard me say this again on the show, but Dr. Sir Ken Robinson, he's one of my favorite speakers of a TED Talk, and he spoke about a woman who came to see him with his daughter, and she was basically put on a side room, and he put the radio on and left, and then was speaking to the mum, and the mum was saying, I struggle with her, and she can't focus, and she's got she's just really stressing me out, basically. And he turned and he could see through the glass that when her mother was talking to him, he looked at the young girl and she was just dancing beautifully in this room to the music. And he turned to the mother and said, do you know what? Your daughter doesn't have any problems. She's born to dance. let her dance, encourage her strengths, don't make her sit on a chair. She's struggling to sit in class. And basically, she was on the neurodivergent spectrum, but she came on to be one of the biggest choreographers. She created Cats, like all of the biggest musicals of all time. She became one of the most renowned ballet dancers of all time and the biggest choreographer. And he said the problem is that when we get to school, we look very differently from how the mind connects to the body, and we kind of disconnect the mind very, very quickly from the body. And that's the problem that we're having. And this is the rise in problems that we're now seeing because we're not treating the child as a full, we're disconnecting them from the mind.
Yeah.
And I think when I listened to that, it was so powerful of how we all lead our lives now every day. We have this beautiful kind of childlike way until we get to school, and then all of a sudden it's becoming very disconnecting. We're being told we've got to sit down, and we all have our beautiful strengths and weaknesses, but at school none of them matter. So you've got to fit into a formula very, very quickly. And I kind of think about that now a lot in like everyday life, that we've been so conditioned to one way, that is there a reason of having such a strong kind of, I guess, pushback with our mental health, because we're feeling so constrained and rigid that we're not being able to explore this as much as we should.
Amen. Like, why has it got to be like that? Why do we have to turn kids into corporate drones? Like, we don't have to. A friend of mine very eloquently said recently that all of us can imagine the end of the world. Basically, we can close our eyes and imagine the end of the world, but hardly anybody is capable of imagining the end of capitalism. I'm not saying that we should get rid of capitalism, but I don't see why we need to pigeonhole kids and ourselves into these extremely rigid roles where you have to be productive in this exact way and you have to have work-life balance. Like, what's work-life balance? Like, work is part of life. That's just a nonsense expression. Yeah. Why do we have to dress like this and stand like this and take these exact multiple choice questions? And if you're not good at multiple choice question, they won't let you be a doctor, even though you could have been like perfectly fine physician, but it doesn't matter because you needed to get exactly 81% on these exact multiple choice questions. It just seems like we're setting the stage for bad mental health for everybody, and just doing our children a great disservice, children who did not ask to be born, amongst other things, by just pigeonholing everybody and ourselves into this like very, very rigid way of life that we were not evolved to live. We were not like 100,000 years ago. Nobody was like, hey, don't forget your 11:30 like Zoom call with like Lyme. Like, it's just crazy. Humanity will look in the future, if there is a future, and be like, what were these people doing? Why did everybody have to like put a noose around their neck? We call it a tie sometimes, but it restricts blood flow. Why was that part of like why do I have to put a noose around my neck? I don't actually. I don't wear ties, but people do. It just seems like we've missed the picture. We've lost track of what's important. What's important is being okay, balanced, happy. Everyone should work, sure, but not like this idea that you have to earn the right to play, like, or dance. Like, you don't have to earn the right to dance. Just dance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, dancing is such an amazing way to move the energy around the body, which is ironically what we've kind of stopped doing. But you've got 6 degrees. First of all, can you just tell everyone what these 6 degrees are? And, from how you're talking, what was it that led you to really try and connect the mind and the immune system together? Because, I mean, you basically termed neuroimmunology. There wasn't this before. You were the kind of person who set this up.
No, neuroimmunology has been a field. But
you were the one who set this organization up.
Well, we just a group, a lab, somewhere really supportive. But no, neuroimmunology has been around as old as immunology, but it's just been sort of a collection of, sort of, yeah. I mean, there are some very interesting. There's this thing from 1885, for example, where a famous ENT surgeon was brought a patient who was suffering from very severe, what they then called rose cold. Now we would call it a hay fever. And this lady had a horrific hay fever. Basically the guy, she'd been given everything like bismuth, mercury, cocaine. Like, it's amazing that this woman was alive at all after like what the doctors had subjected her to. But anyway, she was brought to see this very famous ENT surgeon, Mackenzie, and he was sort of unconvinced that she was really had hay fever. I mean, she clearly had frank attacks. It was very, very bad for her, but he just was sort of didn't quite buy that everything had been done. So he asked someone to make an artificial rose. They didn't have plastic at the time, so it was made of cloth. And while he was speaking to her about, hey, how you doing? In one of the consultations, he just pulled it out from behind a curtain. And it was just like, I'm just going to lay this here. Sorry, what were you saying? And she started to have this like really, very, very severe attack of hay fever. And after, he describes in his paper very eloquently, she was crying, she was, snotty, she was short of breath, like she was having a frank attack. But then when he showed her that, look, it's fake, like it's cloth, she stopped having the attack. And that's 1885. So it's been around. Neuroimmunology has been around. It's just been a collection of these kind of crazy, disparate observations that no one has really been able to make sense of, and hasn't really been able, because of the siloing, it's difficult to kind of put it all together. But people are putting it together now. There are lots of groups working around the world on putting these things together now. So the future is, first of all, somewhat overdue, but bright. Yeah.
So what drew you into this specific area from all of the things that you've done? What was it that you found this the most? What was it that drew you into this specific area of connecting the mind and the body?
Which just seems to be, so, mathematicians, which was my first degree, all of us somewhere deep inside harbor this like fantasy of like the equation that solves everything. That's usually why people go into maths, actually. They want to find this like eloquent answer to everything, including things in their personal lives, which unfortunately is not possible because that's not how personal lives work. But
well, I believe anyone who's so connected to their purpose in work is there's a personal drive.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I wouldn't do what I do unless this was really important for me, of what I went through. And I suffered extremely. And for me, wanted to build a body of evidence and conversations, because I was like, I can't be the only one.
It's clear talking to you that you could really not do anything else. And I'm glad you're doing this. This is an amazing podcast. But I think if somebody was like, hey, you know what? Your job now is to like run the next mission to Mars. You'd be like, no, I got to do the podcast. Yeah. I don't think they could pay you off.
No, they couldn't. I would like to go to Mars though. If Elon, if you're listening, I will go.
Yeah.
But was there a personal driver behind this?
Well, the more you dig, so if you start off with this idea that there must be some beautiful underlying structure to the world, which mathematicians do, people who are drawn to mathematics usually do think that. So, if you're like, well, what's the Schrodinger's equation? Like there is one in quantum physics, right? What's the Schrodinger's equation of immunology? If you say that in a group of immunologists, you either get blank stares or sometimes maybe a sympathetic pat on the back. But all nature has these beautiful regularities underneath. So if you carry on digging and digging and digging, you're like, okay, well, let's study, cancer, for example. It turns out to be largely an immune process. I mean, wherever you look, you find an immune process, mental health, immune process, gut problems, immune process, right? Like diabetes, immune process. Everywhere you look, what you find, aging, immune process, right? Like inflammaging. Everywhere you look, you see the hand of the immune system deep, deep in there. And the more you look into that, you find the hand of the brain deep, deep in there, trying to have a two-way kind of dialogue with the immune system and trying to like work things out. So I just kept on digging out of obstinacy, not out of anything good, just an obstinate person. And after, like 15 years of digging, or, most of my adult life of digging, I was like, okay, actually, it's the neuroimmune system. You just keep on digging and digging and digging, and then you're like, okay, well, that's the reason. That is the thing that ties everything together. Disease, aging, health. What ties everything together is this very ancient relationship between the brain and the immune system, who have also like an old married couple. Like they fight sometimes, and it's not good news if they fight. By the way, that's what autoimmune disease, amongst other things, comes from. But yeah, they're just trying to. They're trying to work things out, they're trying to keep you in balance and healthy and happy. So it's just the result of 20 years of like mindless, obstinate scientific digging, which apparently included 6 degrees. I had forgotten that I have 6 actually.
Well, I'm glad I reminded you, because it's hyper impressive. And I mean, my brain is just going round and round and round as you're talking about this. And my next question is, if you have a lot of stress as a child, for me, makes me feel that child's going to grow up with more inflammation. And does that mean that they're more likely to maybe suffer with a mental health problem or an immune disease, or I guess any chronic disease? Because if we're looking at this at like the microscopic level that you just said, like cancer is an autoimmune disease, diabetes is an autoimmune disease. Is there any study that, like longitudinal study that has looked at children that have grown up, maybe with a lot of stress in their life, to the outcomes of their health?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you're stressed out as a mother, you epigenetically pass inflammation onto your babies. So first of all, it goes back one level. And in fact, there are some studies, some quite controversial studies now that suggest it might go back 2 generations. For example, grandmothers that experience trauma will pass it to their grandchildren. I use the word pass kind of liberally, but you know what I mean? That
this is the epigenetics that
it will transfer through 2 generations, yeah. So first of all, certainly from mother to child, and potentially from grandmother too, and via the male line too, because it's built up in your sperm too. But to answer your question concretely, yes, kids who grow up with stress have higher inflammation levels and higher levels of everything, higher levels of diabetes, higher levels of ASD, higher levels of obesity, higher levels of all sorts of things. There's almost nothing we can find that isn't made worse later in life by stress and psychological trauma early in life, or indeed in utero, in the tummy.
I guess I just look at my parents and kind of think about, my mother had a very kind of calming childhood and my father had a very chaotic, hard childhood. And my mum's health has always been very good and my dad's health has always been very, very terrible. And all the things that you mentioned, cancer, diabetes, stroke, he's had them all. And I kind of think, wow, has his childhood played a really large part on the outcome of his health? I mean, it's a theory that I think many of us don't think about, but actually if we maybe look at ourselves or people that we love that have really struggled with their health and think back to their early days, there could be that correlation and that link.
It's interesting that you say that it's a theory we don't often think about. I mean, why would you expect anything different?
I know, but I just haven't thought about it.
It's just interesting that people don't think about it, and most of us don't. I don't as well a lot of the time. But why would you expect anything different? Why would you expect someone who's had a chaotic, turbulent, potentially traumatic early period in their organism's trajectory to not do much worse later on? Like, what would be the counter theory to that? The counter theory to that would be like, it doesn't matter what happened to you in the tummy or when you were a baby. It's actually completely unrelated to your health later in life. That's crazy. If that turned out to be the case, it would almost like upend all of science, right?
Yeah.
Like that can't be the case. Of course, it's going to follow you. And we know this, it's actually microbiome related, which is why kids, for example, with born to cesarean births do much worse later in life. They don't start off with the mom's microbiome.
That's kind of passed through the vagina.
I'm sure you know a lot about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, looking at children today, if we're thinking about kind of their stress levels, I mean, every generation's experienced a lot of stress. Think about my grandparents who went through the war. There was a lot of stress for them, incredible amount of stress. And then we kind of went through a bit of a hippie period, I think, with my parents. And now, now I have a niece and nephew who are growing up with social media, and I've just watched Adolescence, which, if anyone hasn't watched that, it's really eye-opening. There was a lot of things that, I think I'm kind of still pretty young, but there was a lot of things that I didn't understand about how people are discussing with emojis over social media now. When we're kind of looking at social media use, we're talking about inflammation here, like many stresses that we have day to day. Phones is one of the biggest parts of stress. And you're currently working on a study and your 3 hypotheses that I'll allow you to share, like the 3 thoughts that, that you're interested in. But this burst came when you were sat on a train and you were coming back and you just looked up and you looked around and every single person was on their phone. And I've been really aware, actually, over the last kind of few days before talking to you, one, of how much I am on my phone when I'm walking, which is about 95% of the time. And I've made a really conscious effort now to put my phone away. But also then I wanted to look around on the streets. And it is about 95% of people that are looking down on their phones as they're walking. So it is a big thing. And I have a niece and nephew who both have phones, but don't have social media yet. Can you just talk about the study or the thoughts and hypothesis that you're looking at now with inflammation and social media?
The original thought was because I was, at the time, a fellow of the Digital Futures Institute, and there's a Center for Attention Studies. But the original thought was actually out of frustration on this train ride, as you said. But so obviously attention is really all we have in life. I think that's a statement. So it's almost a trite, right? That's why we talk about it like we talk about money, like you're not paying attention. So it's an implastic resource. You can't replace it. Once you've given your attention to something, you can't give it to something else, right? And it made me think, I'm not an expert in that field, but watching people be so kind of like bombarded by requests for their attention on their phones all the time made me think that we should think of it as a human right. So in law, for instance, there's something like trespass to property. You can't just walk on someone's land. There's also trespass to person, which is short of assault, but you can't just grab people. And so we all accept those things, right? It would be crazy to live in a society that didn't protect privacy, property, and, your personal space. But we don't have that for attention. Why? Why does, I don't want to say a particular platform, but I'm sure you can impute one. Why does platform X get to like snatch my attention? Like I open my phone to do something and I'm bombarded by a bunch of requests for my attention that I did not allow, that I didn't give permission to. I wasn't even asked. So it made me start thinking that attention should be protected like a human right, like privacy. Privacy didn't used to be protected as a human right. That's something that happened in the 1800s, late 1800s. Before that, people just didn't think that privacy was a thing that needed to be protected. None of us now would live in a society that didn't protect privacy. And if you think about societies that don't protect privacy, like North Korea, none of us would want to live there. And yet we're doing that with attention. Of course, then I wanted to connect it to inflammation, because the obvious hypothesis is that the snatching of attention, the commandeering of attention would drive inflammatory processes and therefore mental health problems. And I do believe that. And that's what we're working on, which is what you asked about. But it started off with thinking like, should attention be protected as a human right? Like privacy or property or your person?
Well, I think it's such a big thing. I think many people will connect to WhatsApps, right? Even not thinking about social media. So WhatsApps, a couple of years ago, took off the last seen, or when I've read someone's message, because the pressure of someone knowing that I've read their message and not responded in that instant was causing a lot of frustration between work conversations, friends, and I would feel this pressure to always be on and respond.
I've removed it too.
Yeah, which then basically took me away from any of my work. And then if you add social media on top, so you basically now, any average person who is working will be able to be contacted via email, via WhatsApp, via Instagram DMs, via LinkedIn. And so it's like this constant stream of ways that people can now access you. And that becomes so overwhelming that it can kind of become quite disabling in the same way, where then actually sometimes I just don't respond to anything because I have a sense of overwhelmment.
You don't even want to open the phone.
I don't even want to open the phone.
You used to be able to escape on airplanes. You can't anymore. They put a Wi-Fi on there.
I know. Well, I remember when I interviewed Simon Sinek, and he said to write his book, he's got ADHD, he would literally book a plane ticket to write a book. And he was getting to the point where he would call up an airline and just say, give me your cheapest ticket so I can get on a plane and write my book. Because he was like, it was the only place I could focus. I'm genuinely now considering doing something similar, because my focus and my attention span is so poor, and I'm trying to write at the moment. Now I have got a couple of flights coming up. I think this is quite a good idea. I should just get on and be able to, I'm not going to connect to the internet to write my book. So when we're thinking about what you're looking at, for instance, what is it that you're looking to find through your three hypotheses that you're exploring?
Thank you for the question. So pretty simple, actually, almost something you could explain to, I think I could probably explain to my 4-year-old. So if hypothesis 1, social media use in some contexts at some levels causes inflammation. Causes in the sense that, of course, you have other things that are causing inflammation and other things that are reducing inflammation, like antioxidants. But causes in the sense that if you get rid of it, your inflammation will get better. And if you bring it back, your inflammation will get worse again.
And you're going to look at that through CRP level?
There is some evidence. CRP is a coarse marker of inflammation, as you know, because you're a biochemist. There is some evidence now, yes, that I can't talk about, that the more social media you self-report that you use, the more of course inflammatory markers are up 6 weeks down the line. Hypothesis 1. Hypothesis 2, specific content causes it. Socially stressful content, like violence, like shouting, like hate speech, bad things. I use the word bad very loosely, but I think you know what I mean, and I think everybody does know what I mean by bad.
Yeah, they're not looking at puppies.
They're not looking at butterfly, like mating cycles, yeah. That's hypothesis 2. That specific socially stressful content causes these changes, and not just all content, like not if you're looking at, videos of sunsets or whatever. Hypothesis 3, independent of social media, people who do content moderation, people whose job it is to filter out bad things so that we don't see them, will have higher inflammatory markers than matched controls, people who are very similar to them but just don't do content moderation for a job. We know that those people who do content moderation for a job have terrible health outcomes. Many of them commit suicide, many more attempt suicide. They have depression, they have anxiety, they have all sorts of problems. And indeed, why would you expect anything different if your job is to watch horrible, violent or sexual assault videos that no one else does? Of course, you're going to be affected. So I think it's very difficult to imagine that last hypothesis not turning out to be correct. Nonetheless, we do need to do the work, as always in science.
I wrote this down this time so I didn't forget. I'm thinking about my nephew who loves gaming. It can be quite aggressive. Obviously it's not like people, but you're literally going around with guns, right? Killing people. Would that cause inflammation? Is that the type of negative kind of usage that we would also kind of put that under? Because I'm thinking gaming is huge now.
Gaming is huge. Two things that have been well studied previously are gaming and pornography. And they have been studied very well, respectively, in South Korea and Australia. And the research there is good. Is good. The evidence base is very thorough. And in both cases, there is basically at inappropriate levels. They both cause all sorts of problems, including mental health, but also inflammatory states. Social media has not been studied. Which is sort of surprising. And when it has been studied, people have looked at screen time. There is no obvious reason, and they've concluded that there's very little evidence, but there's no sensible reason to think that simply screen time itself would give you problems. It depends what you're watching.
Yeah.
I would think virtually everybody would agree with that statement. It's likely that the content is doing things to you, if anything, right? So people have studied screen time and they conclude, well, there isn't that much of a link between screen time and bad outcomes, but a little, screen doom scrolling at night, or a 16-year-old watching pornography at 2 a.m, that's not the same as you watching, as you said, David Attenborough or something about, volcanoes or something.
I mean, it's interesting because the word in the Oxford Dictionary this year was brain rot.
Was that right?
And so that was the new word, which is basically that it's like social media is rushing your brain by doom scrolling too much. And I think we're all at mercy, not yourself because you don't have it, but, ending up going down a black rabbit hole of content and not quite sure how we got to this part of this content because the algorithm had kind of fed us this kind of this weird route to get there. Just thinking about kind of practicality, people that are listening to this, that obviously it's a little bit worrying. Is there anything that you're kind of seeing immediately or some thoughts that you might be having that maybe if children or young people maybe have some chronic conditions, whether it's something that's like asthma to, I don't know, hay fever or an allergy, that these are also increased by poor social media use because it's got the inflammation markers are higher? Yeah,
well, there is some good evidence that if you're feeling unwell, for any reason, like if you have a cold or an asthma attack or something, you will seek out social media, which is the opposite direction, I think, to what you're asking. But nonetheless, it's a very interesting hint. It presumably is also the case that the more of the doom scrolling that you seek, the worse that you will feel, to the extent to which inappropriate use of digital technologies generally is very likely to cause higher inflammation, and higher inflammation itself is more likely to cause triggering of allergies, whether neuroimmune-wise or peripherally, more likely to cause asthma attacks, or worsen them, more likely to cause, other crises like rheumatism, other things. To the extent to which we've never found anything other than a bidirectional communication, I think it's extremely likely to be the case that inappropriate use of digital technologies, generally of which social media are obviously an important case, but not the only case, is likely to bidirectionally drive those things. It also gives you a hint at the solutions, right? Because we have pro-inflammatory processes and we have anti-inflammatory processes. So if we do more, it's almost like, try to say it right, it's almost like a tautology, but if you do less pro-inflammatory stuff and more anti-inflammatory stuff, like sleep better, drink some tea, and, have some friends. But loads of things that people like, sleep better, more sex, things that just
make you happy,
make you better, yeah. And less things that make you not better, then everything will be better.
But it's hard because it's also quite addictive. And so I think what I find kind of the irony of this situation is that we actually know that social media is bad for us and we know that screen time is bad for us, but the dopamine hit is so large that we feel so attracted to it. Again, we know that ultra processed food is bad for us, and we know that whole foods and grains and fruits and vegetables are good for us, but it's so addictive from the dopamine hits that we get that we kind of seek these things out. And so, we're all intelligent human beings. We all kind of know the right from the wrong, but we seek out these more negative kind of self-sabotaging behaviors. But then if you flip it on all of its head about, what we're talking about today, about living well, being well, the longevity sector is going up more than ever before. The wellness industry is predicted to be $9 trillion by 2027. Yet the things that are going to increase our longevity, from what I'm hearing from you, is literally like turning off our phones, going back to basics, which isn't kind of what's being, I guess, spoken about in the kind of longevity sphere as much. Ultra processed foods is about eating a very nutritious diet. But this seems to be such an overriding part of that.
To the extent to which inflammation is the arrow of time, anything that reduces inflammation is going to lengthen the size of that arrow. The reason we do these, you use the word bad, I think, but the reason that we seek out these things is because we were designed to operate in a world in which sugar was really good because you weren't sure when you were going to get the next sugar hit. So dopamine spikes are to be sought out, like pleasure is to be sought out in the savannah 100,000 years ago, not now. But then about the fact that they're addictive, I know people, everybody says that, including me, of course, that's clear. As a society, I'm a scientist, I'm an expert on scientific things, not on societal things, but as a society, we have a choice. We have a choice. So opium is addictive, but we have decided as a society that we're going to ban it. Smoking is addictive, but we don't let kids smoke. Alcohol is addictive, but we don't let kids drink. We have a choice. We can say, if social media of some types, of some content at some levels is so addictive that as a society it's harming us because we can't control it because of these dopamine circuits we have from a squillion years ago that had to do with getting sugar. We can legislate. We can say attention is a human right. We can say kids shouldn't be using social media. We have a choice.
Yeah. Australia have done that.
Australia have done that.
Yeah.
We haven't. My native country.
So, I forgot a question, and this is going to connect. So I don't want to leave this on a cliffhanger where people go, well, what do we do? I guess the number one instances that we do is that we try and reduce our time on social media, try to put a time frame on using it, try to create as much friction between us and social media as possible. And I think for parents, it's a harder conversation to have. And that's one that I think is a very hard one to navigate because none of us have grown up, people that are parents today, in a world of social media. So it's a new way that we're kind of going through. But this is something that was really stark that you said to me when we're talking about the immune system and you're thinking about social media and we're thinking about all of these kind of the rises of autoimmune conditions. You said something to me that once we have this big baseline crash, or the big crash of what hits us, whether it's a virus or burnout or we get a disease or whatever it is, we never return back to the baseline. Our inflammation, our immune system never fully goes back. And that was something that really hit me because I think so many of us might think, if I damage my liver, it regrows and I can replenish it. And, if I get sick, I'll recover pretty quickly and I'll be fine. But actually hearing you say that was quite a stark kind of moment where I don't think many of us are aware of that. So can you just explain, the way that I said it in a very kind of confusing way, what that means, that actually our immune system is always on after we have quite a dramatic event?
Yeah, you've said it so eloquently. I'm not sure I have much to add. So the immune system's always on because it needs to protect us from all sorts of things, including from ourselves. So it's always on. A lot of people are working in this area and we don't really understand inflammation and we certainly don't understand the immune system. But there is compelling evidence that basically once you have certain shocks, which can include things like burnout, just to pick up on that example, something non-infective, that your immune system is sort of shocked into a state from which it will always be on alert after that. It will always expect, like if you've had an episode of, very dramatic burnout that puts you in the hospital, the immune system and the brain are rational in assuming that's going to happen to you again, because things that have happened once are likely to happen again. And that after events like that, or a crisis of psychosis, for example, after that, the immune system is essentially, I don't want to use the word forever lightly, but it's permanently on alert, and that you as a result move into a new pro-inflammatory state, which will kind of always be there. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, if you do anti-inflammatory things like, antioxidants and sleep better, eat better and exercise, if you do all those things, it will come down. But once you've had a shock, I think that's what you're asking, once you've had a substantial immune shock, whether it's sort of classically immune like a certain virus, or obviously after a virus, you do return to your normal baseline inflammatory level, right? So there are situations where the immune system does return, the troops go home, as it were, but not always. Sometimes they don't go home. Sometimes the riot police just stay on the streets forever. So, that leads to the question, what can we do? Avoid crises, like avoid burnout. It's just one of these things, easy to say, hard to do, right?
It's easy to say and hard to do, but I think the awareness of it is important. The awareness of, we are living in a culture of work harder, perform better, quicker, more than ever before. We're more on than ever before. And I think sometimes just even like the simple reminders of actually, once you get really hit, you're never going to go back.
Yeah.
I don't think people really resonate with that as much as maybe they should, as one should. I didn't. And knowing that our system will forever be impacted, I think is just a really important message to bring home to people, because if, I think we can go through life so many times without realizing the importance of our health. And it's not until your health is gone that you go, wow, I could have gone to the gym today and now I can't. I could have walked down that road and now I can't. It's not until something is literally physically taken away from us that we realize the power of it.
It's an ancient proverb. It's in every ancient text. It's in the Bible. It's in Buddhist texts. We abuse our immune system, and we also abuse our brain. We abuse our immune system at our peril. It's actually amazing what it does for us. You don't think about it because we're here sort of talking on this podcast. And during this whole time, our immune system is making sure that our microbiome is balanced. It's involved in blood pressure regulation. It's involved in brain regulation. It's involved in like skin, it's working around the clock. It's 10 times bigger than the brain. And it's, as a computational device, it's probably more powerful. Everybody says that the brain is the most complex system in the universe. I disagree. I think the immune system makes a mockery of its computational power. And it's working for us all the time, unsung as a hero. And not only we don't appreciate what it's doing for us and for all those around us, we abuse it as well all the time, and then marvel that you suddenly are, not going to be the same because you've had this shock, and it's doing its best. But like, just because it's doing its best doesn't mean you get to abuse it. Because it's doing its best means you should be grateful and try to help it out. At least not actively hurt it in its efforts to protect you.
To have some self-awareness of it. So if I said to you, because I'm trying to think about the practicality of people now going, wow, okay, my mind is pretty blown with the integration of these two systems. Can you give me 3 things that people should be trying to avoid? And it could be anything from food to exercise to lifestyle factors to be avoiding that's going to be harming this kind of brain-body interconnection. And then I want you to reverse it and give me the 3 things that they should be thinking about. And it can be anything.
Yeah. Thanks for asking the question that way. If I can just maybe answer it sort of in a slightly different way. Politicians are very good at this. It's sort of like answering the wrong question, yeah? So I'm going to just borrow from that. Let me give you this one thing that we talk about in our weekly lab meetings with my students, one of whom is with me here today. We end up having this conversation about what's going to drive up, say, cytokines, inflammatory markers, what's going to drive them down. Of course, we're debating the finer points, like as scientists, of like what exactly is going to happen with this specific thing, right? But almost everybody can play the following game, in my view, and reach a conclusion. For any given thing that you're thinking of doing or not doing, if you just close your eyes for a second and ask, is this going to give me inflammation or make it less? Of course, a lot of the time the answer is, well, I don't know. But I think you will find in 95% of cases, somewhere deep inside, you do know. You're like, should I be eating that burger? John Reynolds, I'm talking to you. The answer is no. Should I be going to bed a little bit earlier? The answer is yes. Should I be drinking green tea? The answer is yes. Should I be drinking Coke? The answer is no. Should I be exercising? That doesn't mean you should be harsh on yourself and absolutely 100% of the time be like no one's born to be a saint. But the top thing you can do, I know you asked for 3, but I think numbers 1, 2, and 3 are all like, just think about what you're doing. Like, what could you do today to make your immune system a little bit happier, make its job a little bit better, a little bit. And then just do that again and again and again. If you do this for a couple of years, if for a couple of years every day you're like, what can I do today to bring down my inflammation level a tiny bit, like one minuscule atomic like reduction, after 2 years, you're a completely different person. You've increased your lifespan by 10 or 20 years probably by doing that, right? And you can just do that. That doesn't require any specialized knowledge. It just requires a bit of education, some of which is happening on your podcast. But I think almost everybody can play this game. And you can also play it in reverse. Is this thing I'm about to do making things harder for my immune system unnecessarily, needlessly? I'm not saying not to, I stay up late at night sometimes if I'm having fun. I enjoy a drink. I'm not saying you don't need to be perfect, but you can ask yourself, like, what can I do? What can I do now? What can I do today? What little tiny itty bitty thing can I do today? Like right now at lunch, we can ask, we're going to have lunch after I hope. And it's like, what we can be like, okay, which one of these things on the menu, So, and then at least if you make a bad decision, a quote unquote bad decision, at least it's conscious.
Well, I think that's what I was getting from this, right? The irony of it is that you'll say, let's ask one question. But what I've taken from that is you're going into each action of your day and thought being mindful, not mindless. And I think we've had like Dr. Ellen Langer on the show who talks a lot about being, mindful, not mindless. And we can go very much into every single day mindless, completely disconnected from what we're doing and how our thoughts and actions are influencing us constantly. So actually, if you're taking a moment to pause every moment of you're thinking about something, you're becoming very mindful in every decision that you're doing and every action that you're taking, you're becoming very mindful. And that one moment to stop and pause allows you to actually be reflective and not reactive.
Yeah.
And that immediately, I can imagine, just reduces the inflammation.
Of course. People who think that they are in control of their lives have lower inflammation than people who don't. Fun fact. Yeah, I think just more purposefully living more you have a choice. You can put the phone away. You don't have to have the slice of cake or have the slice of cake, but, just admit that you're having it, and it's okay to have a slice of cake and then you
totally
eat better later, just have a salad next time or whatever. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You have a choice. Unless you have Toxo, and then
just quickly before we go, if you did not listen to the subscribers on the Compassionate Cure, my Substack, we'd always do 5 questions. It was fascinating, your answers. Just quickly explain what Toxo is, because people at the end of this podcast are going to go, wait, what's Toxo?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I was just giving an example of there are so the immune system to some extent controls what we usually call free will. Society is not quite prepared for sentences like that, but that's okay. The sentences are coming whether we're prepared or not. So I was just giving an example. One example is that there is a deep connection between your immune system and your personality at various levels. And to give a very concrete example, Toxoplasmosis, a bug that cats give to mammals, including humans, to make them take more risks so that they can eat in mice, for example, or in the case of humans and big cats in the savannah eat us, that this infection lives in your, it doesn't give you any problems. It doesn't cause you any outward, and that's why you don't know if you have it. But it lives in your amygdala, a little bit of your brain that controls all sorts of things, including fear. And it makes you take more risks. A lot of human death, more than most diseases that we consider serious, and in fact, more than murder, terrorism, natural disasters combined by a large factor, are caused by risk-taking in people who have Toxo, like running red lights, like having unprotected sex, like being more likely to be involved in violence. But it doesn't quite end there because it also makes you more likely to take positive risks like starting a company. And it also makes you better looking. so I'm not saying to get rid of Toxo, which we could, by the way, but to appreciate that what we consider free will is not that free. Our immune system is controlling. It's partially in charge.
Wow. I mean, if you want to know more about that, definitely go over to the Compassionate Cure and listen to Dan and I's 5 questions, because it really blew my mind. We're going to have to do another podcast on free will versus the immune system versus personality traits, because that's just opened a whole Pandora's box that I did not expect today. Dan, thank you so much for your time. The kind of integral link between the mind and the body, and people might not be thinking of the body as the immune system, but as you said, it's the largest. How many, what did you say? What was that quote that you said about the immune system? Has how many?
It's got a lot more cells.
A lot more
and they're
cells.
all connected to each other. So as a computational unit, it really packs a much, much bigger punch than the brain.
I mean, I am such a big believer in the mind and the body being one sole integrated unit, and you've kind of furthered my belief in that today. So thank you for the incredible work that you're doing. We have to have you back on again. This has not been long enough. I knew it wouldn't be. But firstly, I have to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests, which is, what does live well, be well mean to you, Dan?
More love.
Oh,
I know everybody is always like, oh, we need more machine learning. I don't think we need more machine learning. We just need more love.
we need more love.
Yeah, including for ourselves, of course, but just
definitely for
broadly.
ourselves.
Broadly, yeah, more love, less machine learning. Well, maybe we can have both. But
although, please, not another AI marriage. I can't believe the first AI marriage.
you
had
taught me
taken
that. I didn't know
place.
that happened. I learned that from you. I learned a lot of stuff from you in a short time.
Yeah, the last day, the first, and I was not the last, but the first AI marriage had taken place last year. So I agree, we need more human love.
Yeah, more human love.
Dan, thank you so much for coming on and all the incredible work that you're doing.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for running this podcast.
I cannot wait to see the results of the social media. We will definitely have to get you back on to talk about that.
You'll be the first to know.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.